Good evening and warm welcome to our webinar, France Elections, which impact on current and future foreign investments, that we are organizing together with CommStrat and Jeantet. We are delighted to talk about this subject. Frankly speaking, when we had the idea together with Guillaume to organize a discussion on this subject, the situation was not the same as today. We were in the middle between the first round and the second round of the elections and expecting potentially another result than the one that came out this Sunday. Nevertheless, there are still a lot of questions. Nobody knows how the new government will look like, what the different positions will be, and which impact this may have on foreign investments. We will briefly talk about the criteria that make France so attractive. We will focus on the reasons and these criteria and question if this will still be the case in future. But before doing so, Guillaume will present the current results of the elections and also make some simulations, predictions. Maybe he knows more than some of us do about the outcome of the election and the future in France. Thereafter, we have prepared a couple of questions that I will raise, but you have a chat also in the web system webinar, and any question is more than welcome. We will try to take a maximum of questions and look forward to having a sort of exchange with our public, with you. So, Guillaume, thanks a lot for joining us. Guillaume Labbé is a communication strategist and the founder of the company CommStrat, which he founded in 2017. He's the CEO of this company. Guillaume graduated from the University of Paris 2, Panthéon-Assas, with a bachelor degree in law. Yes, he studied law. He joined the very famous, prestigious École nationale d'administration, and obtained a master's degree from the University Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, in constitutional law and fundamental rights and public law. Guillaume's passion for consulting is built on an academic foundation in constitutional law, political science, and management. Guillaume is a real expert. He believes that successful communication and public affairs now requires an approach integrating aspects of law, strategy, and corporate social responsibility. His experience spans several key areas. He has worked closely with very high-profile political figures, including prime ministers, potential future presidents, people like Alain Juppé, Jean-Pierre Raffarin, and Dominique de Villepin, just to name some of them. Before founding CommStrat, he served as an associate director at Bourrit Talon & Associés, which is another leading public affairs consultancy company in Paris. Guillaume is a lecturer at Sciences Po, where he teaches negotiation and directs a certificate in public affairs strategy and influence. And he also teaches international relations at Paris 1 University. I have myself been working with Guillaume for a couple of clients. Every time there are issues linked to public affairs, to government relations, we try to work together, each of us in his specific area. I'm Carl Eb de Sevlinge, an M&A partner of Jeantet. Jeantet is one of the leading French law firms, and we are delighted to have you with us. So, will the results of the elections of July 8 have an impact on current or future investments? Those of you who are planning to do investments will be able to tell us. You may have read some articles, as we did, of investment banks that are making statistics on these foreign investments. How is the general foreign investment landscape looking like? I'm not now doing the work that would be much better done by an investment bank, but just to give a general overview on the European FDI landscape. Overall, there has been a decline in Europe on international investments during the last year, even though 2023 may have been relatively a substantial year in terms of investments. Overall, there is a decline of more than 4% everywhere in Europe. If we look at different countries, so we look at the UK and Germany. In Germany, potentially, or in reality, the decline was heavier than in the UK, which seemed to be more resilient. What happened to France? Well, France is, for a surprise of some, not for us, but is the country that has been attracting foreign investments by far. So the most foreign investments during the for 5 years in a row, which is quite substantive. And where does this come from? Well, it may come from efforts that were done. So you see that the French country is a country that has a lot of strengths. Strengths in terms of its geographical situation. There are a lot of skilled employees, people very well educated. France has excellent schools in economics, but also in engineering. There is top infrastructure in terms of airports, highways, etc. It has a reasonable market size. It's one of the biggest countries in Europe. It's a centralized country, which considerably eases things. You can go to Paris and find the lawyers, the financing advisors, even though there is economy also outside of France. And for the time being, energy is particularly cheap. So these are factors that do drive, for a part, decisions on foreign investment. It's definitely not the sole reason, because you find education, you find a good geographic area, infrastructure, and market size also in our neighboring countries. So this alone does not explain the reason for the attractivity of France. The reason for attractivity of France, in our opinion, is also based on the considerably improved legal and regulatory framework that has been put in place during the last years, mainly by Emmanuel Macron during his time as minister and thereafter also as president. So we know the reforms in the area of employment law. In these days, if you do a transaction in France, the Works Council cannot block anymore a transaction. Redundancy payments are limited to very specific predefined amounts or limited amounts. And you have the ability to adapt your workforce, which has been made much more flexible. There were days when people thought in France you can never reorganize a company. So there was a lot of things were done on the side of flexibility in terms of regulation, but also on the tax side, we got considerable reforms. The corporate income tax has been decreased to 25%. There is wealth tax, but this is now only limited to real estate. A flat tax on dividends of 30% has been implemented, and a lot of other reforms. Is this enough to drive investments? The answer is no. On top of this, we consider you need to have political stability. You need to have a government, you need to have an administration, and it's ideal not to have street oppositions. France went to experience of yellow jackets. We consider that having, again, yellow jackets would potentially not attract particularly new investments. But most importantly, the country has to be predictable, and people or investors will want to rely on the legal and regulatory framework. So Guillaume, when we look at the result of the elections, what do you think? What is the trend? What do we have to expect? Can we say already something? Or is it fog and not predictable at all, which would mean investors will hold on and wait before doing their investments? What is the current situation?
Okay, thank you, Carl, for inviting me. It's really honored for CommStrat to be with you, to try to give some advices and bring some light in this foggy situation in France. First of all, there are many things we know already. For those who didn't follow carefully the politics in France, which is a bit complicated, I must confess, currently. 1 month ago, Emmanuel Macron's party lost the European elections. It's the National Rally. Basically, it's a populist right-wing party behind Marine Le Pen. Won these elections. And everybody was very surprised because at the end, right after the results of the election, Emmanuel Macron decided to use his constitutional right to reshuffle the National Assembly and basically to say to the French, go back and decide to choose a new Assemblée Nationale. It was a shock, but it's really something that the President de la République can do in the Fifth Republic regime. Of course, it was a very bold bet. Many people considered it was a very bad move because, of course, it's really hard to imagine that if you ask to the French to vote one day and if you ask to vote again 3 weeks after, probably they didn't totally change their mind. And basically, this is what happened. And indeed, when we decided to organize this event, it was we used to think that basically the first round of elections, who showed the national rally high in the votes, would lead to a populist Assemblée Nationale, and it was at this moment really crucial to discuss with all of you to try to see how things will happen.
Well,
yeah.
Guillaume, sorry to interrupt you, but that was a really scaring situation. I remember foreign politicians, including German ministers, were saying, we now need to find a new partner in Europe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we cannot trust this country anymore.
Yeah, indeed. And even if I consider that the National Rally is a populist party, they are still considered as an extreme right party. I think it's a bit different, and we can, of course, elaborate on that if there are questions on that. But I think it's more, Marine Le Pen is a bit like Giorgia Meloni. It's clearly a model, but she's really different to her father, who was a real extreme right and close to fascist guy before that. So, of course, this populist wave was shocking, and I totally understand that the business was, international business was really scared about that. But, you know, unlike our British friends, we in France like to scare everybody and try to pretend we are very bold people, but basically, after the shock of this first round of election 1 week ago, basically there was alliances and decision to withdraw some candidates, and in the 577 districts which has to vote for one MP, basically there was decisions to make sure that the extreme right was not alone, and it was hard for them to get elected. So if we share this, you can see how is currently the Assemblée Nationale. Basically, if we try to summarize, there are 3 blocks, 3 main blocks, or at least 3 election coalitions. One is on the left with 180 MPs, but they are divided between the extreme left with Jean-Luc Mélenchon. It's called La France Insoumise. A real extreme left party, but they are like 80 MPs only. There is the Socialist Party, where there is François Hollande and where Emmanuel Macron comes from. So basically, they are social democrats like the ones you have in the UK or in Germany, for instance. So there are people that everybody know and who are in charge of Europe for long now in Brussels, and they are like 30 ecologists, Green Party. So basically, it would be false to think that they are like 180 extreme left people. It's not true. They are like 80 extreme left MPs in Assemblée Nationale. In orange or yellow, you can see the central bloc led by Emmanuel Macron. Basically, as you can see, he didn't. Of course, he failed in these elections, and he lost a lot of MPs because he had like 250 MPs before this reshuffle. However, he's still as influential as the left. And then you can see in red the Conservative Party, it's les Républicains, it's the party from President Nicolas Sarkozy, Jacques Chirac, etc. So it's the old-fashioned conservative in France. Basically, they were very weak because a lot of their voters decided to vote for extreme right or for the center and Macron. So they are like 50 MPs, but they were the same before. So it doesn't change for them. And after that, you have the famous national rally, and as you can see, they are a bit more than 100. They are 140, but they are less than Macron's majority or former majority. So as you can see, it's really balanced, and they are not really free blocs because they decided to be free coalitions to win the elections because of it's a two-round election in each district. But basically now they are still social democrats, extreme right, extreme left, conservative or centrist, and even in the center there are three families, different families. So it's a mess, but it's a parliamentarian regime that is coming, and so it's a bit surprising because in France it's been a long time, in decades, since we didn't have such a mix in Assemblée nationale, but as you can see, a very wide majority is really Democrat and from the former parties, basically. So things have changed. Emmanuel Macron lost his majority in Assemblée nationale, but in a way, we have a chamber that looks a bit like what you can see in Germany, for instance, or in countries like that. So it's interesting because we are at a moment where there are many people, but each party is weak and has to take decisions. And so it will be interesting to see what will happen in the next week. So I think it's wise to wait a bit, because in 1 week, the MPs will have to decide who they will, if they want to build a kind of coalition, or if they want to oppose Emmanuel Macron. What is really important to know is to keep in mind that Emmanuel Macron applies the Constitution, and the Constitution clearly explains that the Président de la République names the Prime Minister. So he remains, in a way, the game master, even if he is weak in the Assemblée nationale, but he was already quite weak in the Assemblée nationale, but he still has the ability to choose. So we'll dig further in the different scenario, but it's interesting to see.
So we can say that the president is a guarantor of stability because he in any way will stay unless he would resign, which he definitely does not want to do and is not declaring at that stage.
Absolutely. And you know,
until 2027, there would be a new election. He cannot present himself again. And he has a huge part of power, potentially a little bit less compared to what he had so far, but he is the most powerful person.
Yeah, and you know, and as he proved that, and clearly it was a very bad move, probably one of the worst moves, maybe since David Cameron's choice to ask for a vote for Brexit. It was a very bad move, and that will remain in the political history. However, he's a gambler, and he lost this time, but he's really smart. And the Fifth Republic was always criticized because it gives a lot of power to the head of France. It was General de Gaulle, who was a former general, so who founded that. So he still have a lot of opportunity, and he's playing now and trying to ask for a very broad coalition to say, you are MPs, you got elected by the people, so you need to make a kind of coalition and put your ego and your ambitions aside and accept to be there. So it will be in the next weeks, of course, very interesting to see how things go. And basically, the advisors to Emmanuel Macron are trying to discuss, to negotiate with the leaders from the center left to center right to try to make a kind of majority coalition, but it's not our culture. Basically, if we were German, it would be just easy, and it's exactly what's going on currently in Germany. In France, we don't have this culture, but the law allows that. So basically, we could imagine.
But do you think it's still comparable to other countries like the Netherlands, Germany, in which a coalition is an important contract that is negotiated over weeks, months, and the purpose of which is to be in place for the whole legislative period, meaning 4 or 5 years.
The big difference is our culture and the fact that in the constitution, the Président de la République is elected by all the French and has a lot of power, unlike real parliamentarian regimes and pure parliamentarian regimes where basically everybody and the ministers are part of the parliament. So it's a bit different, and still the guy who was with the more influential is clearly Emmanuel Macron, and he's still, currently is in the US for a NATO summit, and he said to the press that he remains the protector of stability, and that basically he asked every Democrats, pro-European people, and basically pro-business people, to form a majority. So of course, currently the leaders of the left or right party are saying, oh no, I don't want that at all, but people will have to choose if they decided to be on the majority or on the opposition. And as it's there are no winners to the elections, and it's what Emmanuel Macron said, and in a way it's true, it will be a nerve game. And in France, we often say that Emmanuel Macron is le maître des horloges, basically the master of the clocks, and is a bit that because he has this constitutional power. So if we sum up about the what could happen, and if I find a crystal ball to say what can happen, there are scenarios clearly. First, no clear majority at all in the parliament, but the left bloc, who is making a lot of press and media explaining that they won the election because they were the first coalition, but not so high. They should form a majority, but of course Emmanuel Macron doesn't want to do that. The French firms, associations, companies, etc., were really clear about the fact that the left coalition program is really crazy and would be bad for business. So everybody knows that there won't be 150 persons who won't be able to lead the majority, especially as it's an anti-business majority. So we can consider that people we need to negotiate, to take some time to let the pressure reduce. And however, on the 18th of July, the MPs will have to say what they really want to do. So it will be interesting to do so. There is...
Guillaume, can we say there is an extreme representation... the extreme politicals are heavily represented in this new parliament on both the left side and the right side. But in any way, in order to form a government and to get majority, and you need majority to pass laws or to cancel laws, they will have to enter into a coalition with the center, basically with the center. And therefore, even though there may be an extremist part in a new government, the huge probability is that it's more left than right, because nobody wants to enter into a coalition with the RN, with the extreme right wing. We could be hopeful that the changes will not be as catastrophic as we could expect them if a left wing would have won the elections and if they would have an absolute majority in the parliament.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that what was really important to understand during the results of the election was, do the extreme right and extreme left, can they decide to block any government? Yeah. They should have been more than 257. It's not the 87. So it's not the case. They are like 200. If you had,
would be the possibility to dismiss a government based on a law that is not passed,
they can't do that. Yeah. They need centrist and left and classic right and left people to vote with them. So they are quite weak. And basically, if you take in a coalition extreme left or extreme right, you will lose any ability to pass any law. So basically, there won't be any coalition with extreme right or extreme left, because if you do that, you lose all the middle people, and basically there is a majority. So now, the challenge, and what will have to be seen, is that will Emmanuel Macron manage to be a bit German and convince people from left and right to come with him, or at least only people in left with this centrist majority, or the right with the center. It will be interesting to see that. So basically, if you are looking to scenarios, you can suppose that there are two main scenarios. One is a coalition, like what Macron is trying to do. Of course, you can imagine that the supporters to Emmanuel Macron who come from the left are trying to to build a coalition with the left and the center, and the people who support Macron and who come from the right are trying to convince their former allies of the right, Conservative Party, to come to this. And both can work, but it's not our culture.
We have a question that is coming up from the chat. Will it be possible for President Macron to split the NFP and to only allow the moderate Social Democrats into government, excluding Mélenchon?
Absolutely, absolutely, because if you are thinking about Mélenchon and the people loyal to Mélenchon, because some people are trying to go away from Mélenchon considering he's really too aggressive and against any unity in France, which is quite true. So yeah, you can, if you remove Mélenchon and his supporter, you still have 100 people from the Green Party of the Socialist Party. So if you add these 100 people to the center and to the former majority, yeah, you can have at least a minority government that is quite strong. So it's really something that is possible, and clearly no one imagines that Macron or anyone goes with LFI, with the France Insoumise and Mélenchon. Basically, until we reach the 18th of November, they are trying, the left coalition, big coalition, is pretending that they can choose a prime minister, etc. But it's not our institutions. The institution is that the president states that the president can name a prime minister, and this prime minister can try to build a government. And what will be the truth moment will be if this government accepted by the Assemblée nationale or not. And this
okay,
is why,
so on this scenario one, you are quite optimistic, positive. We have one of our spectators, he's referring to something that speculations in Germany, particularly saying it's the end of the Fifth Republic, and we are now at the cliff of the Sixth Republic, and things will will change, or are we going back to the Fourth Republic, which was more a republic of coalitions?
Yeah, we don't know, because basically we are just clearly we made the French made a strange choice, because it was not a powerful wave, and we are used to do that, but basically the constitution applies and is really clear. It's really surprising to see that we didn't have in our recent history such a moment, but clearly the text and the Fifth Republic works well, and things are really clear. The government, the Assemblée nationale can't do anything against Emmanuel Macron because he's elected by the people, so he's basically the head of state, clearly, and no one except him can decide to remove him. However, the prime minister and the government can fall if Assemblée nationale decide to vote against them. This is why it's really tricky. I think the Fifth Republic will last more than Macron or Mélenchon or anyone. But clearly, it's true that in a way the Fourth Republic was known because there was a lot of changes, of government changes, and that can clearly happen. However, keep in mind that Gabriel Attal, the prime minister, is still prime minister. He has, and the current government has exactly the same power as they had 1 week ago. And especially for the European Games, for all our friends who are intending to come to Paris for the Olympic Games, things will be exactly the same, because we have a clear government who can do whatever he wants. Of course, we know that politically they are weakened because we are discussing about a new coalition. But clearly, the government has absolutely all the power he needs to have. So it will be a very political game in the next weeks, but there is a strong stability, clearly.
Second scenario?
So it's the first scenario. So don't worry, that we won't have any LFI, France Insoumise, extreme left government, and we won't have any extreme right government. It's something that I shouldn't have bet on 1 week ago, but now it's really clear. The French decided to avoid this chaos scenario, and I think it's for the best. The second kind of scenario, so it would be, the first was the coalition. It's something that Macron is trying to build. Second scenario, a minority government. Consider that Macron doesn't manage to bring aboard people in the Titanic, people from the left or from the right, because of course we know that people who voted for the left or for the right didn't vote for Macron, so it will be hard for an MP to explain that he's coming to a majority with Macron, because he got rejected during the election. So we can imagine too a minority government.
Which we had, or so far it was the case, wasn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we can have a minority government. It means that you have like 200 MPs on 570 MPs who are trying to support a government. So exactly as the current government, you don't have a clear majority, but you have a short majority, and so you can try to act as a government. So it means at this moment that if it's the left, they need to convince all the center to avoid to vote against them. So it will be impossible to have the left, I think, building a minority government. Or if Macron is a gambler, he can say to the left, okay, make a government. But they can make a government, they can decide to take the jobs and all of that, but at the end of the day, when we will be on September, they will come to the parliament and they just will lose the vote and they will go back.
Well, Macron a gambler is an interesting sentence. In a gambling you have a winner or loser. Can we say at this stage it looks as if he would have won his gambling game? When you look at this as you describe it, we have right wing, we have left wing, they are neutralized, and at the end, potentially everything will be decided in the center, which he wanted?
Yeah, in a way, yes. It's clearly not what the people wanted. Yeah. But if you look at the polls, people say, okay, now that I voted, I want all these people to work together. And it's not the mindset of the French politicians. But clearly, people would expect something like in Germany or in Brussels, something saying, okay, you are different, but try to find solution and consensus. But of course, when you discuss these days with the leaders of the political parties, they are just thinking like, okay, Macron maybe Macron has the ability to call for another Assemblée Nationale in 1 year. So many people are already thinking about what they will do in the next year, meaning that in a way, it's possible that if you decide to wait for next year to see new elections and see there is a new wave on one side or another, you can imagine a kind of technical government where you decide to put people coming from the business, economists, civil servants, and you ask them to organize a consensus government and do what the public affairs in France
well, this sounds very, very positive, Guillaume. People are asking if we think that the result of the elections may trigger a decrease of investments by German companies into France. It's difficult to answer the question because we will know once we see the statistics, and it will very much depend on the new government and the things that they may change. Yeah, changes if we listen to different programs. Yeah, from the left wing, if it would be an implementation of this program, that would result indeed in considerable increases of taxes, in considerable changes to employment law regulation. But as you explained, the left wing, neither the left wing nor right wing can decide on themselves and form a government by themselves. They will have to compromise with others. Mm-hmm. So we should expect at least a strong presence of liberals in such a government. And what does that mean for the investment climate? There will need to be presence to be given after the elections. Yeah, so potentially impacting the pensions by a decrease of the pension age, I suppose. But on other things that are of particular importance for investors, we're not so pessimistic in general, and it needs to be differentiated by areas. Yeah, for example, if we talk about the renewable energy, depending on the presence and impact of the Greens in the new government, this may be quite positive on any investment project in this area. Overall, what we assume is that this period of insecurity may postpone some projects, yeah, because they may take a little bit longer in terms of authorization, in terms of composition of new administration, etc. But France has already done a revolution in the past with blood, and this is not what we expect.
No, this is not what we expect. Basically, keep in mind what I say to especially the people in the different industries who are in France. The local governments remain absolutely unchanged. The MPs have absolutely no impact on what's going on in the regions, in the departments, in the cities. The administrations remain the same and very active, and we know in France how influential is the administration, so they remain the same. So basically, it's only the political national level who is reshuffling, discussing, but basically, at the end of the day, people who have the ability to decide, even if they decide to just let a technical government and pretend they don't have anything to do with that, basically, it will be the former government people. François Hollande, the former president, who was Emmanuel Macron's boss when he was his advisor, is now back to Assemblée Nationale. People who are there are people who were in the former governments and basically from left or right, but these people are pro-Europe, are pro-Ukraine, they are pro-business, and so basically it's not revolution people at all. This is why I think it's really important to have this perception, because what we were expecting last week was really different, especially as even the populists were trying to explain that they are pro-Ukraine, they are pro-business, they are pro-Europe. So even the populists tried to change their position, a bit like Giorgia Meloni in Italy, or a bit like the Spanish extreme left, because they know that basically you are in Europe, you need investors, and basically in France there's a clear consensus about reindustrialization, and so basically everybody wants in France foreign investment, and basically all the dynamic made by Macron with the Choose France Summit, with all this first seat in the European investments, it's something that everybody wants to keep, except maybe extreme left. But even extreme right, if they had won the elections, would have done this.
We ask if there are examples of other countries where the lack of an absolute majority has significantly impacted foreign investments. What lessons can be learned for France? So if we think of countries with a lack of strong majority, well, let's look at our neighbor Germany, for instance. Yeah, there is no strong majority. It's a pure coalition. To the best of my knowledge, this has never had a negative impact. Again, it's not that much about the type of government, which can have an impact if they would implement weird regulations, but more of a certain stability and predictability, even if it would be the option 2, or 3, a pure technical government, even a technical government, they would ensure that the existing level framework is maintained, that authorizations are granted. It would not change dramatically the country. The country needs certain changes in terms of general indebtedness, etc. But this will not have an immediate impact on an investment management's decision. I mean, in terms of what we have seen, we have seen that some exclusivity undertakings have been postponed for a couple of weeks now, that people want to see which type of government will appear. I'm quite confident that post second round of the elections, we don't have a suspension of transactions, and even yesterday and today we received very interesting transaction projects, and are working on them. So there is no hold in the general investment climate. But there are a lot of questions, and I imagine that in multiple investment committees, you have to be able to answer the questions. How does France look like? Is it what type of democracy is it? And is it an environment in which we still can do our investments, even though it has good food, good wine, and an exceptional seaside?
Absolutely. There will be the Olympic Games. I think it will be a good way to explain to the world that basically we are kind people and civilized people, because the fact that we still have a government, we are prepared to these Olympic Games. So I think there will be a lot of proofs that things go well. Basically, if I can give you an example, we can't have in France a kind of shutdown, like in the US when the Democrats and Republicans don't manage to find a solution. We have tools, and the state, the government can decide to make decrees to make sure that the civil servants are paid, etc. So we are the Fifth Republic is a very strong regime. And as long as we still have a president and administration, basically things will work. And keep in mind too that the local authorities don't change anything. And basically, I think in the next weeks, it will be important to keep discussing with the administration, with the regions, because they still remain there. And what I think is that they will be strengthened by that, because the time that it can take some time, like in Belgium, for instance, there was no clear government for 2 years. So it's a very different regime than us. But it worked well. Business went very well in Belgium during 2 years. So maybe it will be a bit the same if we can consider that they don't really manage to make a strong coalition or anything. All the good reforms that Macron has made in the past will stay, and there won't be a lot of changes. So,
well, there won't be a lot of changes. There always can be changes. France is not a monarchy. If we look back in the history of the Fifth Republic and the different presidents and changes of governments, do you think that they had an impact on investments? If we look at the early 80s, François Mitterrand, when he became president. Do you remember what the reactions were of both people and companies?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but there was the Communist Party, and it was before the fall of USSR. So things were really, really different, and basically a lot of business went away. A lot of people left France. At least the business. Left, but they came back 3 years after that because François Hollande decided to be quite liberal in economy, and things are really different. What we are speaking about is the ability for center-left to center-right to agree on a scenario.
I remember,
they don't need even the ecologists.
I very well remember when I was in New York talking to US colleagues. That was in 2000, back in 2011, and they were laughing at me and saying, "Oh, you're living in this country with this weird president imposing taxation of, I don't remember whether it was 75 or 95% as of a certain amount. How can one go to France and be interested in France?" Indeed, this project did not survive, and very quickly he adapted and became a quite reasonable regime. So the difference, and today, whatever will happen, it's not a pure left-wing government that we may expect, and therefore the risk is relatively low that people will leave the country. That's a huge move of investment bankers who were, particularly during the last months moving to Paris because of relocation of a lot of investment banks and their leading people. So we don't think that this will stop. This will continue.
Yeah, and anyway, there's a strong pressure on the government because we need to, on September, explain how we can resolve our deficit and how we can save money. And basically, no government will say, okay, I will change the pension law. And because we, as any country, we need to make sure that the markets keeps on giving money to the French state on the market. So I think it's really political. And so it's really important to keep in mind what we said, and that everybody maybe ask you when they have questions, because things are not like on TV and like in any democracy. And it's probably what you can see a democracy, because there's strong debates, a lot of discussions publicly, while authoritarian regimes have no public debate and they are always remain the same. So we need to accept the fact that there is a political game going on, but clearly from a business perspective, there is a strong stability and things have not changed so much. This is why I think it's interesting. And the difference between the former republics is that the Fifth Republic is really, really stable and explains very well how things can happen. So basically, if we have a technical government and in 1 year, another legislative elections, we see what happens. But it was really interesting to see last week that even if people can be pissed off and decide to vote on extreme left or extreme right, at the end of the day, they are really happy with the normal democratic MPs. And basically, if you look at the local elected people, the mayors, the regions, it's only from center left to center right. So it's really normal people and pro-business people. So there's a very large consensus about on nuclear energy, on the business rules. So it will be really strange to consider that French are crazy. We have not made any Brexit. If you look at our British friends, that will look always really rational when we are passionate people. Basically, France didn't decide to make some silly things at the end of the day, even if, of course, we often see that the extreme right go really high in the polls, but like in almost any country in Europe or in the US. So, but yeah.
We looked at the parliament because of the elections that took place. Yes, that's why we focused on the parliament. We talked about the president and his power. We haven't talked about another important power in France, which is a recent power. It's the street. So do you think that certain people who may consider that their votes will not be taken into account, for example, if we end up in a central government or liberal government, be it left-wing or right-wing, will end up in the street and try to use the street as a political vehicle?
Yeah, it's something that can happen if there is a weak government. Clearly, it can be a way to put some kind of to change the balance of power, because the extremists lost the elections. Clearly, they lost the elections. So they can try to do that, but it's like in any country. If you remember about Brussels, what happened in Brussels with the farmers, what happens in the US with the riots, and if you look at the German way to resolve what happens in the streets. So basically, I think it's really like in any democracy. But there's no real risk, I think, and there won't be any revolution. And if you look at what happened, what made the extreme left or the left during the legislative elections, it was quite, people were quite happy. It was a way of demonstrating, and we have, of course, in France, a kind of tradition about going to demonstrate in the streets, but it was not violent or things like that. So people need to work, people are happy with the local authorities, so it would be, I don't believe that there can be more than maybe some strikes, but as anyone who comes in France, sometimes there are strikes sometimes, because we are not, it's how we discuss between unions and firms, and things won't change on that. So basically, I think what's going on and the next weeks won't be so different, and I think that everybody will see that France didn't change, and I think it's really important. Everybody likes our way of life in France, and people, even if they are unhappy, even if they vote sometimes really aggressively and are never very happy, basically no one wants to leave this country because it's a great country. So I think that it's really important to remain really rational and see what the facts. And the facts are that on the 577 MPs, 400, 420 got re-elected. And so we are only speaking about 170 MPs who changed last week. So it's not really what I call a revolution.
When the right wing had such an important support, was so many votes in the first round, there was a particularly strong reaction in Germany, and saying if France would have a right-wing government, this will very negatively impact the Franco-German relations. So we can now say that this will not take place. Do you have any idea of how the Franco-German relation would be with a new government that could be as a result of a coalition in France?
I think Germany had exactly the same things with Italy. And basically, Giorgia Meloni made her best to reassure people, even the Germans. Most of that, I think that even Chancellor Scholz, they know that the extreme right and the populists are stronger and stronger in Germany during each election. And basically, and I'm not a supporter at all to Marine Le Pen, but clearly she's not her father. She's a kind of populist leader, but when you really listen to what she said, they are not racist, they are not, xenophobic. They stopped saying good things about Putin, but in the past they have done that, and they make huge efforts to explain that they are not Putin lovers. So if it happens, and probably it can happen in 3 years during the presidential elections, it's something that can happen clearly. She will try to do everything as Giorgia Meloni, and they already decided to do so. So if something happened like that, and I'm not sure it happens because it's been like 10 years that we worry about the rise of populism and extreme right populism. If it happens, things will change. And I must say that I work with a lot of lobbyists who are based in Brussels and who work for American companies, and they say that they make a very positive work with the extreme left government in Spain, or with the extreme right government in Italy. Why? Because this kind of populist parties desperately need to show that they are pro-business, they are for trade. Because of course, when you decide when you have to rule a nation like that, you definitely need support. So it's not, they are not Nazi or really violent people. So the Germans, like anyone, will have to say to do that. And basically, it's exactly the same as what we are all as Europeans wondering about the re-elections of Trump.
Yeah.
And probably, I suppose that if Trump is re-elected, hopefully he won't be alone, and he will have advisors, and he will have to do with the world and with the markets, and probably be less crazy than what we can expect.
There are some people reminding us of the subject of our webinar today. Imagine you're called by a new investor, and he says, well, I'm following closely the elections and what is happening in France. Would you recommend, so he's raising the question to you and to me, you from a more public affairs relationship, me from a legal perspective, would you recommend to put on hold and say, let's observe the situation for a couple of months, a year, what happens to France? Or would you say, if you have an attractive business opportunity, go ahead?
A client asked me that 1 week ago, and I said, come and negotiate with the government currently, come and negotiate with the parties, because clearly it's a very interesting moment to if you are interested by the prices of energy, for instance, in France, if you have a target that you want to buy in France, it's clearly a good moment to ask for an offer from the state, a real official offer, and to negotiate. I think it's a good moment for that, because there is these changes. But clearly, in 1 week, we know more what kind of scenario is coming. And there is no scenario that is collapse or chaos, not at all. So I think that you only need to maybe wait for 1 week or 10 days to see how things turn. Maybe wait to see what will happen during the summer and the Olympic Games, which will be a truth moment, clearly. If we are able to manage such a complex project, it will show that we are strong and there's no real risk. And if you are a bit of a gambler, you can start negotiating with the state, saying exactly what you think. Basically, I can invest in France, but I'm really worried about what's going on. What can you say to me? What can you propose to me to protect my investment, to convince me to come? So it's a good moment from a public affairs and negotiation perspective. I think it's a good moment to enter negotiations and, of course, take some time to see what will happen. Yeah. But there's no real risk.
Well, from a legal point of view and lawyer's point of view, I would differentiate the areas in which this investment is planned. Yeah, if it's indeed a highly regulated area and a project in which the government or the authorities have their say, it needs to be looked closer, and indeed there is a particular interest to enter into discussions with the authorities. I would say in most other type of investments, there is no reason today to postpone. If you have a little bit of time of observation, maybe you wait at least a week or two to know about the new prime minister and the government, and be assured that the declarations that were made by some extremists will not be implemented. Yeah, so that's probably reasonable to say, okay, let's. So if you are about to sign your exclusivity for a sale or an acquisition, yeah, maybe you wait for a week or two, observe closely, yeah, and then move forward and do your investment in a very promising country, which is still and definitely will be France in future.
Yeah, and if you are thinking about industry, clearly, classic industry, chemical, etc., it's important to see where are the sites that are interesting for you. Because if you go, for instance, in Normandy or in Hauts-de-France, in the north of France, the public authorities are really, the local authorities are really pro-business. They are desperate about having more investments, and you will have clearly a red carpet. So once you really ban and make a deal with your local authorities, they will totally support you, and whatever happens nationally, they will be on your side. So it's really important to keep in mind that the administration is strong and influential, and the local authorities will really be your champions if you have any issue with the state.
Well, an investor is not only looking at the coming year. Yeah, an investor, well, it depends on the areas in which you invest or a type of investor. Private equities are more mid-term investors, but you have strategic investors, you have investors in infrastructure. They're really long-term investors. So they will not look only at the coming weeks or months, but they may be interested what will happen in the next decade. Looking into the next decade means who may become next president of the French Republic. Do you have anything in your glass?
I think that there is a need for changes, and personally I think that the very centralized system in France is really something strange and explains a lot why people vote for populists. Because clearly, if you look to France and if you compare to Germany, to Italy, to Spain, everything is really centralized in Paris. And it's something that people can't bear because it's not something that is normal. So clearly, I think in the future, the politicians will be able to change things and decentralize and explain to people that it's not only about Paris and that you have all other regions, maybe trying to look a bit more like Germany, Italy, Spain, where things are really decentralized. And I think that these kind of democratic people who are ready to change things and modernize a bit things will clearly have the ability to make something positive of this public angriness. So I think that in the future it will be interesting to see if there are no other leaders who are not coming from Paris and who are ready to to change things to help everybody, because the extremist votes are clearly the ones who are from people who don't live in the big cities like Paris.
Well, Guillaume, thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting, thoughtful exchange. For us, it's important to do this because, particularly in France, economy and politics are very linked. Sovereignty is a huge subject which is addressed. The governments are controlling the foreign investments, but a country like France doing via Choose France and attracting a lot of foreign investors. Thank you very much for having participated in this, and we are at your disposition for any questions you may have later. Thank you.